No industry changes faster than modern marketing. Great marketers need an edge. Great marketers need to be brave. The Brave Marketer podcast provides an opportunity for each guest to share a story where they exhibited bravery by taking a risk that made a dramatic impact in the market. Our guests are marketers from top brands and agencies who share the exact strategies and tactics they used in their brave marketing moment. We then dive deep into topics like ethical advertising, consumer privacy, crypto marketing, brand safety, and navigating a future without third-party cookies. Hosted by Brave Software and me, Donnie DeVoren, head of sales at Brave. Together, we'll get a backstage view of the brave marketing moments and creative mindset work that's shaping today's most influential brands. Hello, Brave Marketer listeners. Hopefully you're having a great day. Today we're speaking with Sergio DosSantos, Director of Technology and Digital Transformation at P&G Beauty. Sergio was actually born and raised in Venezuela, where he graduated as an electrical engineer. He's currently located in Geneva, Switzerland, at the European Headquarters for P&G. But before we hop in today's episode, we want to highlight our Brave Pick of the Week. Every episode, we choose a brand that has run an ad campaign with Brave. And this week's Pick of the Week is Herotainment. They ran a push notification ad with us. Herotainment is an award-winning New York-based transmedia and entertainment company and reality game group and award-winning blockchain studio. Together, launched Smitey's Universe. In this blockchain-fueled experience, each Smitey character is tokenized into an NFT, a non-fungible token. For this launch, Herotainment chose Brave's push notification ads to amplify their brand awareness and reach gaming enthusiasts. So what was the impact? Their CPA reduced by 60% compared to other social media channels, and their conversion rate was 43% of the people that visited converted to paid users. And so now for today's episode of the Brave Marketer. Hi, Sergio. How are you doing today?
Hello, Danny. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Welcome to the Brave Marketer podcast. We're so excited to have you on from your P&G offices over in Europe. So why don't we just start the episode? And before we get into your brave marketing moment, why don't you just share what the most exciting thing you're working on right now?
Oh, absolutely. There's plenty of exciting stuff we're working on. But if I think of one, it's got to be our P&G Responsible Beauty program. This is something that is really close to my heart. There's an element of what we call the P&G Responsible Beauty program, which is all about equality and inclusion. Within that, we do have a big responsibility in our digital ecosystem to make sure that we are just treating everyone equally and making everyone feel included in their experiences with our brands. That includes our digital presence. So there's plenty of insights. And by the way, there's a lot of people. There's more than 1 billion people in the world with some disability, or rather with a special ability. And for all of those consumers who are trying to understand how to have a great hair day, for example, we also have to deliver the best experience we can. And that's something we're working on. So my team and I are trying to make sure that we deliver a superior experience for everybody, including for those who have an element of disability, like impaired vision. So they may be using a screen reader when trying to understand which product to use or which products to buy. And that's something really exciting. More than exciting is the right thing to do. And it's something I'm super proud of my team and I working on.
Got it. I like how you positioned it. Someone's ailment is actually someone's superpowers. That's a very good and positive way to think about it. So why don't we go into your brave marketing moment where you were starting to convince some senior leaders and a head of legal to run P&G's first experiment in Second Life. So tell us about that whole story, that whole process. I think the listeners would be really interested, and any learnings that they can have from that experience that they can apply to their own marketing lives.
Absolutely. This is one of very funny situation that actually got us into this experiment as P&G. And I say it's very funny because prior to having kids, my wife and I were very heavy into gaming. And one day my wife comes with this, like, oh, have you seen this Second Life? And I was like, no, what is it? And we got into Second Life and we started playing around Second Life. I'm sure you've heard of it. And when I realized that this was a place where consumers were really discovering new ways of doing things, and where consumers were even, or people were even spending real money on virtual things like the equivalent of a NFT nowadays. But back in the day, buying a virtual real estate on your Second Life to have a private island or to dress up your avatar was something that truly intrigued me and truly got me into thinking, as part of my work in beauty and in digital, how does that work and what's the role of our brands, if any, in this world? And I remember when I was listening to a speech from one of our senior leaders talking about courage and talking about disruption and talking about bringing forward your ideas, because we are all consumers as well. And here I am in a corridor conversation with the CEO of our business at the time, where I literally pitched the idea of we should be experimenting, engaging with young consumers in this environment, which was not known to the advertising industry as much. It was a bit of a hype. What we were recommending at the time was, why don't we have a virtual water balloon fight? It was around a product, a brand that we had, which was about hair styling, like a wax and gels that you use for styling your hair. And the key insight was people are here not for what they are when they're not in the Second Life environment. So they're here to have fun, to disconnect, and to go somewhere else. So that idea of just not coming into this environment or platform with a traditional view of advertising to display yourself, but rather to engage with your audience in a different way. Now, from that crazy idea to convincing management to spend a lump of sum of dollars into creating this, into engaging with the audience, it was a big leap. And in retrospect, two of the key learnings I have on this one was I needed to create a coalition of people who believe in it. It is not a one-man's job. So it was really convincing a group of key decision makers that this was the right thing to do to engage with our audience. Ultimately, we did execute it. It was not a massive success. It was not. The penetration of the platform was very low in the countries where we were expecting to have a big impact. Nevertheless, it created a very serious conversation online about the approach to advertising in platforms like this one. And somehow, Donnie, this reminded me of the recent experiment we ran on Brave. It really did reminded me on it, which is not only the learnings we got from an actual execution of an advertising campaign, but rather the unexpected, and which to me is fascinating, is what you were not expecting to see, like reactions on Reddit or conversations going around, wait, what? Why am I being targeted on this? And is this target? Like, all of those consumer reactions to me are very precious. And it's part of why I thought of sharing with you what happened to me already once in the case of Second Life.
No, it's good with Second Life. And I love that you chose a story that actually didn't have a huge success and a huge win, because every time we have an interview, it's always a success story because people want to talk about their successes. And you're probably the first one that says, you know what? I took a risk. I got a lot of no's. I still persevered. I did it. It wasn't a home run. It was okay. But you followed your intuition. You didn't give up. And you went out there and you did something. And it's like the Brave campaign. Like, I'm sure some people said, no, what's this platform? Why do we need to do this or whatever? But then you start seeing the results on Reddit. And I've said this on other podcasts, like, people don't talk about display ads on Reddit or Twitter or whatever it is.
Exactly.
But when they see these ads on Brave, they talk about them.
They do. You cut through. I tell you more, both in the case of the Brave campaign we ran with you and in this example I'm mentioning. The biggest thing is you learn, you pivot. And I did carry a big responsibility when I was executing that example I mentioned on Second Life. But since it wasn't a home run, as you said, to me, it was a big learning that I was able to document what worked, what didn't work. I mentioned a couple of them. Distribution of our products in the countries of where the platform is, penetration is high. It's huge, and it was huge at the time. And I actually took the time as part of my responsibility to share this everywhere, to make sure everybody in this company knew about it, that we shouldn't learn the same thing twice, but also to make sure that we elevate the conversation when it comes to risk-taking and learning from failure. There's a lot of joy when I find myself in a situation where I'm failing, because I'm quickly turning into, What did I learn? Why did I learn? And this was just one more example of it.
Yeah, exactly. How is P&G thinking about privacy right now?
Privacy, it's such a broad territory. I like to think about privacy in the way I like to think about my privacy. By the way, my background, I'm an engineer. I love data. I eat data for breakfast, type of thing. So one of the things that is my personal inner conflict is privacy and more data are two things that are very hard to reconcile. However,
Very paradoxical.
exactly, which it's a great tension to have when you're responsible for that, for business. To me, privacy is not an option. It's a mandate. We have to be privacy oriented. We have to put the consumer privacy at the forefront of everything we do. There's no shortcuts and there's no exceptions granted on this territory. One of the things that I personally think about privacy in the world of browsers and in the world of digital in general is that there is an element that North America looks very different than Europe. I'm based in Switzerland, where consent is the enabler to whether you are sharing or not sharing data. To some extent, consent is being regarded in an opposite way in US versus Europe, where in Europe you have to opt in. In North America, you can opt out. But to me, a very important element of consent is that it's got to be active. It cannot be passive, right? It has to be something that the consumer understands, that by clicking on this one, that by watching this video, that by opening this app, what is going to happen with my data? What is actually being captured, shared, and being used for? And I believe the consent part in particular, if it becomes an active action, like I have to do something so that you get my data, it's a part of the solution here. Now, there is the very ugly implementation of this right now, which is you go to any website or to any app and there's a million consent things to manage and to accept and opt in. And there's the very poor execution of this. But I think over time, my kids probably will grow up to see a much better execution of this consent. But right now, I would say it's elevating the conversation around privacy to everyone, whether they are or they're not paying attention to what is currently being presented in front of them.
Yep. And you said in the beginning that you think about privacy in terms of yourself, and you talked about the data, but how do you think about privacy in terms of yourself?
Personally, I do not mind being or having a added value in terms of what I see or the personalization of the content I read or the convenience of speaking to my Google Home to perform certain tasks. Knowingly, I do share my data and a lot of data in the process of doing so, but I do understand the value I get in return. And as a result, I constantly opt in and consent to give again and to give more of my data. So that's the way I think about it for myself. And that's the way I like to think about it for what I do, which is if I will be in a position, if I'll be presented with the option to share or to not share my data, will I? And if, by the way, there is a very famous rule is the rule number 10 in my book, which is your mom is always right. If my mom will say yes, then probably it will be right. So that's the rule of thumb that you can apply to when it comes to personally is, will you say yes to that?
Let's talk about where P&G thinks about technology and advertising technology and where it's going to go over the next 5 to 10 years. What changes about the landscape?
Tremendous changes. I do think we haven't even landed in a sort of post-COVID era yet. But if I think of a 5-10 years down the road, I do think there is going to be a component of what we would probably refer to as post-COVID, where COVID definitely many areas here. A couple of ideas that cross my mind are, I definitely think that personalization and how will consumers appreciate the personalization and what fuels personalization, it's definitely going to continue to be data in a very different way. But personalization, to me, it's one of the areas that I think is going to play a big role in how brands and advertisers will be able to reach consumers. There's not going to be, I believe, in 5-10 years, products that are not relevant to me or ability for me to waste time going navigating through the options. They will definitely come to me in a much more personalized and specific way. For example, we're right now recording a podcast. To me, this is an area that I am fascinated about the evolution of it. However, and I do listen to many podcasts, one of the things that always strikes me is if you listen to other podcasts, and I do listen to many of them, they begin with thanking their sponsors. None of them, or 99% of them, are relevant to me. And I'm like, in 2021, I'm spending another minute and a half listening to 5 of the sponsors of the podcast I love, but they are not relevant to me. Why is this not programmatically coming to me? I do think, for example, that there are areas that today we are starting to see penetrating big time, such as podcast, but where technology hasn't catch up with it. And we haven't really nailed that personalization factor yet, which is going to take this to yet another, for example.
How do you do all this personalization while still keeping consumers' data private?
There isn't an easy answer to that. If there is, I like to know it. There are many elements that begin to paint the road ahead. One is there is got to be algorithmic models that are able to, without the same vast amount of data we're harvesting today, so with a lot less data, there will be algorithms that will be able to, with sufficient accuracy, point in the right direction of personalization without the same amount of data as we do today. Let me put it differently, significantly with less data. That's one element growing. The second element growing is where do we consume this personalization? The pivot on TikTok platform, for example, into a content graph, it's having ripple effects in the full industry. And that's a beginning of a trend that requires significantly less data, but delivers a superior experience into that engagement. So I believe we will continue to see algorithms playing a big role in personalization that will graduate to be self-sufficient without the amounts of data we thought we needed.
What do you think is the biggest threat or the most pressing challenge the marketing industry is facing right now?
The noise is probably what comes to mind. It's very hard to cut through. Targeting has become very permeated across so many elements of the ecosystem that I believe cutting through, getting in front of the consumer and getting their attention, it's becoming very hard over time. And one of the things that I particularly enjoy scouting for is what makes the cut. How can I identify the drivers of stopping another millisecond when you're scrolling your phone and so on? It's like, what is making that happen? Sometimes it's creative ideas and creative executions, right? Sometimes it is. But sometimes it's also about the right moments. And it's about the right, to some extent, the right consumer understanding that is so hard to do without data, but that continues to be the number one. So for example, first-party data, it's known to be crucial at this point, not so much for the traditional use of it, but to understand our consumers to the level we never thought before. I think it's going to be very challenging moving forward.
Got it. Anything else come to mind?
Well, there's always the next generation of consumers who are so different. And I do have 2 kids, but I already see an entire new generation coming up. They would have heard and they would have considered hiring brands to solve some of their problems in a way that we today, traditional advertising companies and brands, haven't even seen. Like it's maybe happening in our own backyard, but we haven't seen. And I do think this is going to happen faster than we think. So I do think in my professional lifetime, we will struggle with the younger generation and reaching out and building brands with them.
I think the Olympics is actually a good example of catering to the younger generation. They added a few different sports that are definitely for the younger. Skateboarding comes to mind, even surfing, rock climbing. There were 5 new sports this year. And I was watching a documentary on it, and it was all about saying, you know what, the younger generation may not be into ping pong and weightlifting and fencing. They want to see surfing and snowboarding. And in 1998 or something, when they introduced snowboarding and it was Shaun White, they saw how well that it did. And so there's data to show that you should have introduced new sports, and you have to think about the younger generation. It's also interesting to think that, like, I always thought of myself as the younger generation. Now I'm 43, almost 44 years old, and now I'm not the younger generation. Those are kids now.
Exactly. And the funny thing there is you blink an eye, you blink it twice, and they are us. So this happens very fast. I don't think we are ready for the pace of change in the way we're approaching many of these things. Now, obviously, I do think there are ways to adapt to this. I don't think this is the end of it, but I do think we need to come up to the conclusion that we do need to be very agile in the way we are adopting new technology, new platforms, and so on.
And finally, can you nominate another brave marketer that we should have on this show?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, Donnie. I do have a lot of respect for a very brave marketeer. His name is Raman Segal. He actually runs podcasts too. I did work with him some 15 years ago. He's a good friend. I believe he's in New York nowadays. He runs a podcast. One of them is called The Modern Minorities. I do urge you to reach out to Raman and to get you into this podcast. You'll have fun.
We'll have an introduction. It's always good to interview a fellow podcast host. They know how it goes. And finally, if people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I'm always available. I tell this to everyone. I am the very busy person, but I'm always available. You got my LinkedIn profile, which I'm sure we can share. 100% available.
Well, Sergio, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Donnie.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed listening to another episode of The Brave Marketer, that time with Sergio. I thought there were some great takeaways from that episode. What comes to mind, obviously, about privacy is that privacy is not an option. It's table stakes now. It's a mandate. And consumer privacy needs to be at the forefront of all business activities. There's no shortcuts anymore. There's no getting around the system. You have to be privacy first as a brand. And secondly, that the future of advertising is in creating personalized experiences while still preserving privacy. Obviously, that's a challenge. Like when you do personalized experience, you want to have a lot of data. And privacy is all about kind of not having as much data because you're not able to collect that data on the users. So it creates a challenge, and the smart marketers who figure that out are the ones that are going to be winning. And thirdly, the importance of embracing change, being agile. And we talked about the Olympics example that I brought up about adding new sports. And then, you got to target the next generation of consumers, because if they don't have your brand in their mindset when they're younger, it's going to be much harder later on in their lives to get them to know your brand. I mean, I think about a P&G brand, Old Spice. I remember my grandfather, when he would come visit from Israel, using the Old Spice deodorant and the aftershave. And to this day, I use Old Spice. And it's because of the influence of my grandfather that had on me when I was 7 or 8 years old. I just remember that brand and I remember the scent. And there was just a nice, thought about it. So finally, if you like what you heard today and you found it valuable, it'd be super helpful if you took 1 minute to leave us a short review in Apple Podcasts. Every review counts in helping us get our show in more ears. And on one final note, if you have a brand, product, or service that you'd like to get in front of Brave's 34 million users, please email us at adsales@brave.com. Let us know you're a podcast listener to unlock one of 2 perks. So the first perk, if your budget is under 10K a month, we'll bump you up to the top of our self-serve waiting list. Or if your budget is $10,000 or more, hopefully it is, you'll qualify for a 25% podcast listener discount. So again, email us at adsales@brave.com. Finally, huge credit goes to my brother, Ari, living in Austin, Texas. He did all the music of the intros and the outros and throughout. Very talented musician, and we really owe all the music to him for that. So thanks again, Ari Devorin. And that is a wrap, and we'll see you on next week's episode of The Brave Marketer.